Hello, my name is Eamon McKee. I'm Ireland's ambassador to Canada. I want to tell you about a project called Honouring Indigenous Aid. It's a little known story that's only recently come to light because of new archival research. The project is hosted by the National Famine Museum at Strokestown House, the Irish Embassy in Ottawa, Irish Heritage Trust, and critically, of course, St. Mike's College at the University of Toronto. When word spread about the famine globally, there was a lot of fundraising efforts. They ranged from India and Calcutta in the east, and what we now know as far as Western Canada, today's Ontario. When the Indigenous nations and bands of Turtle Island, what we call Canada, heard of the plight of the Irish, they wanted to do something about it. And they set about raising funds. The Mohawks, Haudenosaunee, the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, Ojibwa, Ottawa, Oneida, Mississaugas, these groups got together and raised funds despite their own privations to support the Irish. It tells us something very important about human agency and the desire to help. That compassion even stretched to those who could afford very little. In fact, one of the messages from many of these groups was that they wished they could do more. And so for the Indigenous fundraising, this was absolutely critical. And today we want to remember that and to thank them for the assistance that they gave us in those grim years of the Great Irish Famine.
I'm here at Massey College in the University of Toronto and on the traditional territory of the Mississauga and the New Credit. Behind me is a mural painted by Indigenous artist Philip Cote depicting the signing, or essentially the agreement, of a treaty between the Indigenous peoples of what was then Upper Canada and the British Crown. So depicted behind me, Sir William Johnson and many members of the various nations that lived on this land, including the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and particularly the Mississauga, who had entered this territory almost 3 generations before and occupied it. This is an excellent way of explaining the manner in which Indigenous people related to the Crown, because they did so through treaties, expecting that the Crown would honor their part of the treaty as would Indigenous people honor theirs. And it's in this treaty-making relationship that we have a variety of responsibilities that are clearly spelled out. And it's not surprising then that when Thomas Anderson, almost 100 years later, in 1847, makes a plea to the Indigenous people of this region for Irish and Scottish famine relief, that the treaty would be called to mind as maybe one of the reasons why Indigenous peoples, in this case the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, responded. Because on the 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day, Thomas Anderson wrote the following to all of the bands and nations within his jurisdiction as Superintendent of Indian Affairs. My dear brethren, there are a few of you who have not at some period of your lives felt the cravings of hunger, but a merciful God has thus far preserved you from the miseries of famine, and none of you have seen their children, their fathers or mothers, their husbands or wives dying around them from want of food. Brethren, this is now the lamentable case with some of your white friends. Hundreds in Ireland and Scotland are daily passing into the lands of spirits because they have not enough food to keep them alive. Brethren, your great mother the Queen and all of your white brethren throughout the world are collecting money and other measures to save their lives. You also have the means of contributing to the relief of your suffering and dying fellow subjects. Inform me by letter of the amount you wish to give, and I will forward it to your great Father at Montreal, who is pleased when we show acts of kindness to our fellow creatures. Signed, Thomas G. Anderson.
My name is Darren Wybenga. I'm the Traditional Knowledge and Land Use Coordinator for the Mississauga-the-Credit First Nation. I am reading the letter that Joseph Sawyer and Peter Jones wrote to T.G. Anderson on March 22nd, 1847, regarding famine relief for Scotland and Ireland. Sir, we beg to acknowledge the receipt of your letter of the 17th instant in reference to contributions towards the relief of those perishing for want of food in Ireland and Scotland. We are exceedingly sorry to hear that our fellow subjects in those parts of the world are visited with such awful calamity. Feeling the necessity of rendering aid to such as are in real distress, we gladly subscribe the sum of £12 10 shillings currency out of our land payments, and beg you will have the goodness to pay that amount into the hands of our great Father, the Governor General, that he may forward the same over the great waters. It would have afforded us great pleasure to have given a larger amount, but we regret to inform you that our people here are in a very destitute state, arising from their not having raised any quantity of produce during the last summer, owing to the suspense concerning the removal, and the few potatoes they planted having also proved a failure. We beg also to state that if our people are kept much longer at our villages, their suffering for want of food will be very great, and we shall be obliged to devote larger sums of our annuity to keep them from starvation. We have the honor to be, sir, your obedient servants, Joseph Sawyer and Peter Jones, both signed with their dotem. I find this a very remarkable letter considering our state at that time when the letter was written. We found ourselves just about to be homeless. Our lands at the Credit River were put up for sale, and we had to find a new home. And so in the midst of this, we're contributing to famine relief. We're deeply concerned, we're deeply worried. Where are we going to go? Yet we still find time to contribute to famine relief. And to me, that says a lot about the Mississaugas, I suppose, and First Nations people everywhere. We had to share in order to survive the harsh environment, to live on the land. And so I think it came quite naturally to us to share and reach out and help other people. And so we're very glad to do that, because we were no strangers to starvation in our history either. Scarcely 25, 30 years ago, we went through a period of time in our history where we were in a terrible plight. We were on the verge of extinction or disintegration as a band. Our traditional economy had collapsed. The settlers had moved onto our lands, and we were stricken with all kinds of disease, illnesses, starvation. It was awful. And now we hadn't forgotten either. We have a good memory. We have a very good memory. And I think it's only natural that we reached out to help. And I'm very glad we did. It shows you our friendship and alliance as articulated in that first treaty, I suppose, the 1764 Covenant Chain Wampum Belt, where we were seen as allies on the land. I was very happy to note that one of the signatories of the letter was Chief Joseph Sawyer. He's my 4 times great-grandfather, and he was the chief of our band. His name means the sloping sky. I'm very proud that my distant relative had a role to play in this and expressed a willingness to contribute to such a worthy venture. It's truly humbling, even years later, to read of his activities in this matter. So wonderful, wonderful.